Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, the clash over costings. Is this Tony Abbott's big mistake? Why we're losing more soldiers in Afghanistan? And Russia's Vladimir Putin shows how it's really done. Our panel tonight, former policy advisor to Peter Costello, Alan Anderson, Deputy Editor of The Punch, Tory Maguire, and ABC Lateline reporter Peter Lloyd. First, though, the state of play in the election seat count. The ABC's election analyst Anthony Green joins us. And Anthony, you're calling Hasluck for the coalition?
I'm calling Hasluck for the coalition. The Labor Party, well, the coalition is 796 votes ahead with 88.5% counted. So there's no way, as far as I can see, that the Labor Party can turn around that lead. So I've called Hasluck for the Liberals. And the other seat I've called on today is Cannane, that once the absent votes started being counted, they were expected to favour Labor. That's exactly what they've done. Labor is now 906 votes ahead and will go on to win Cannane, which leaves only the electorate of Brisbane in doubt. At this stage, we've got 72 all between Labor and the coalition, and Brisbane's the only seat remaining in doubt. And
there's been some interesting movements in Brisbane today going towards the coalition.
Well, we had it narrow at one stage towards for the coalition, and Labor sort of narrowed their vote. We had a batch of pre-polls arrive. Someone suggested to me there might actually be from the inaugural barracks is in the middle of the electorate of Brisbane, and it was suggested to me that these might actually be the pre-polls from the barracks, and they were 60% in favour of the LNP. So that's widened the gap. But it's 796 votes there, but only 78.5% counted, so it's not nearly as advanced as the other electorates. So there's a lot more counting to come, a lot of absent votes yet to be counted. So we're not calling that one yet, though still the LNP is far enough ahead to feel that they should be able to hold on to the seat.
So that would be, as we said yesterday, 73 to the coalition, 72 to Labor, 4 independents and 1 Green.
That's right, and that looks like being the makeup of the new parliament.
Anthony, some commentators today are suggesting, let's just go and have another election. But it's not that easy, is it?
No, they can't. The parliament has to sit. You can't just go off to another election. We've seen examples in 1989 in Tasmania where Robin Gray sort of talked about trying to have another election after losing balance of power to the Greens. The Parliament has to sit, and to get an immediate new election, you'd have to prove that the new House was unworkable. You'd have to have a dead heat, so you couldn't elect a speaker, or you'd have to have the government form and then constantly be defeated on votes on the floor. So the independents, who, like Tony Windsor, would have to act to make the Parliament unworkable for the Governor-General to grant a request for a new election. The Parliament's got to be made to work at least for a while. It's highly unusual to grant a dissolution request within 12 months of an election.
And in fact, we could see 2 changes of government before we even had an election, couldn't we?
Well, that's what we saw in 1940, which was the last time there was a hung parliament in Australia at a federal election, that the Menzies government continued in office. Menzies replaced by Fadden at one point as Prime Minister, as head of a coalition government. And then about 14, 15 months after the election, the government was defeated on a budget bill, and John Curtin became Prime Minister mid-term. If a government, say the Gillard government stayed in office for the next few months and then was defeated at a vote, and the Gillard government asked for an early dissolution, it may be that the Governor-General would ask, well, this Parliament's only new, is there an alternative government in the chamber? So don't presume just because a government falls in the next few months that the Parliament wouldn't continue with a new Prime Minister. It's unusual. The last time we saw it, say, was in Queensland in 1996 when the Goss government lost a by-election, which produced a baton change. The Borbidge government took office. It's unusual, but it's not unprecedented.
Anthony, thanks again for the update.
Thank you.
Anthony Green, the ABC's election analyst. Well, after Julia Gillard agreed to work with all the demands of the country independents, you would have thought the same might apply to Tony Abbott. That was until he gave a press conference last night where he refused to provide his election policies for costing by Treasury.
Public service is not in the same position vis-a-vis opposition policies to provide advice and insight as it is to provide advice and insight on government policies.
That is nonsense.
Thank you.
I'll just walk away.
And the independents were quick to respond to what they see as a big blunder by the opposition leader.
Well, I think it's a fairly silly thing to do. It's not a good start. I can't see why an independent authority such as Treasury can't be trusted to look at those numbers. I can understand why he didn't want to do it prior to the election, but the election's over.
Obviously, every person in Australia at the present moment believes that he's got something to hide. I mean, I think he's been very ill-advised to take this stand.
The Treasurer said although it was unusual for the independents to be allowed access to the Treasury information, it made sense in the current situation.
What we are responding to here, I think, is a legitimate request from the independents. They are seeking information for the impact on the budget bottom line of both government and opposition policies. I think in the circumstances we are in, that is entirely legitimate.
Tory, why would Tony Abbott be withholding his costings in this situation, do you think?
Oh, probably for the same reason that he was withholding them all the way through the election campaign. I mean, it's probably a tactic designed to perhaps gloss over the fact that maybe some of their costings aren't as thorough as they should be. And look, from opposition, it's very hard to do that anyway. But I think it's a risk that he can take at the moment, knowing that, according to Anthony, which is what Anthony's been saying pretty much since Sunday, that the Coalition are likely to have 73 seats to the Labor's 72. Because despite that long list of demands that the independents have made on both sides, all three of them started out the week saying that the most important thing to them was stability of government. And that extra seat just provides a little level of comfort. And I think it's given Tony Abbott the confidence to take that risk because if he does form government with them, he doesn't want to necessarily have kowtowed to all of their demands and let them run the show. And at the moment, Julia Gillard is looking a little bit like she'll do anything to appease them and to please them. And she runs the risk of forming a government of which she's not actually in charge.
Alan, how do you read it?
Look, I think there are probably two reasons why Tony Abbott has refused to give over these costings from Treasury. And the first one is really a reason which is more selfish, but the other one is one that I think is quite principled. Now, the selfish one is, I think, to be frank, that this whole debate about a leak from Treasury is more a proxy for a broader point, that the Coalition has lost its faith in the objectivity of the Treasury. And I think that as a result of some of the things that have happened in the last term, they are suspicious of what would come out of Treasury if it were put in that position. So
they've lost faith in them to do a decent job of the costings? Is that what they're saying?
I think that they have lost faith to an extent in the objectivity of Treasury, and I say that only from a personal point of view, but I think that may be part of what is driving considerations. The second point, though, and I think this is very important, is one of principle that has arisen now. And we've heard a lot about conventions in the last period and over the last day, and I think these conventions are very important. They exist so that the public service is not put in the position of essentially adjudicating who should be Prime Minister of this country. And people may not realise, but costings are a very subjective sort of process. There's usually a lot of iteration that goes on. So it's not just a case of what does this cost? It's a case of Treasury going back to parties, getting further information, the sort of thing that happens during a campaign. And to put Treasury in a position of doing that now, not in the context of giving confidential information to a political party, but actually in the context of giving it over to the independents, who, for all they know, might give it on to the other side, that puts Treasury in a very difficult position. And I think it's important to realise that Tony Abbott's stance on this is dead right, and that the craven surrender on this point by Julia Gillard really is an indication that, in my view, she's failed a test of leadership here. She's failed to go into bat to defend an important convention, an important thing for our system of government, because at this moment in time, she's willing to surrender on every point.
What about Bob Katter's point, though, that it looks like Tony Abbott's got something to hide?
Well, and that is an appearance that I'm sure that he is well aware of in making this calculation. But I actually believe Tony Abbott when he says that he is concerned about these conventions. They are critical conventions, and I think giving way just because in this particular election there are three independents who frankly are starting to overreach themselves somewhat in their requests. I mean, these guys weren't elected to be three Prime Ministers of Australia. They were elected to be independents, and they are asking to get information that an incoming Prime Minister would not have access to.
OK, Peter Lloyd, whether it's a principled stand or not, the independents don't like it, and whoever is going to lead this country is going to rely on those independents.
Well, at the moment, it's a matter of who blinks first. I think the point you're both making is that Abbott is in a position where he believes he can see whether they blink first, because they're the ones who are actually in the weaker position out of the two of them. Long term, that he could go back, hopes they could go back to the polls. Then the independents are no longer a factor, and I think the Conservatives are probably playing for time to go back to the polls.
And that polling this morning about what the constituents of those three independents think and what they want to happen would have made Tony Abbott feel even more confident.
Strengthens his hand, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Tony Abbott changed the argument a little bit this morning and made it more about the leaks to Treasury. And he said he wouldn't put his costings before Treasury until there was a federal police investigation into the leak of the costing that happened during the election. Now, the election is over. Would it matter if the figures leaked out now, Alan?
I think that the issue of the leak is really a proxy for this broader issue of confidence in Treasury. And obviously leaks have occurred to different parties over the years. But I think the fact that this has happened in the middle of an election campaign has made the opposition rather sensitive about what they perceived already to be the lack of objectivity of Treasury.
Tory, what do you think?
I think it's also politically convenient for Tony Abbott to say that that is a reason. Look, it's a legitimate concern, but I don't think it's the only reason that he's doing this.
Yeah, because he's basically prejudged the federal police inquiry already by saying there should be a prosecution. Well, how does he know that? The inquiry hasn't finished yet.
Well, Tony Abbott may be keen for the leakers to be exposed and prosecuted now, but that wasn't always the case. Let's take a look at what he had to say last year about the Rudd government's treatment of former Treasury official and Liberal leaker Godwin Gretsch.
Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that the AFP have done anything wrong, but I tell you what, this is a government which is using all the agencies of the state as a form of political coercion and intimidation.
So, Tory, last year he was saying it was political coercion and intimidation to call in the AFP, but now he's got a very different stance, doesn't he?
One man's criminal leaker is another man's, hero, isn't he? I mean, it's not surprising that he's changed his position on this. It depends which way the leaks are going.
Is there a double standard here, Alan?
I think that all sides obviously take these sorts of advantages when they can get them. But as I say, I really don't think that it's just about this leak. I think it is a broader proxy for trust in Treasury.
Peter, how do you see it?
I don't think the Treasury leak is the issue. I think it's about playing for time for the next election. I think the Conservatives are hoping there'll be another one.
Is that what you think too, Alan?
I actually find it very difficult to see there being another election. And I'll tell you why. When you look at the demands of these independents, one of those demands is for an agreement to run to full term. And Julia Gillard, in fact, has appeased them so far that she's now saying she'll let them help set the date. Now, the reason that these guys want this is not really because they are great believers in the stability of democracy in Australia. They want it because they know they will never be as important as this again in their lives, and they intend to milk this out and string it out for all that it is worth. That is why they want a government to run to full term, and I believe that when push comes to shove, they will do everything in their power to ensure that it does.
Tory, do you think there is